Thank you very much. And thank you, Mike, for sticking around, and he's going to record it. And I, just to start out, this is a very slim slice of the history of First English, okay? It doesn't cover all the bases by any means, but it covers a slim slice, and you'll understand as I get into it what this slice is all about and why it is significant. Now, when I was here in the 60s, I'm always interested in history, but not so much then. But when I came back in the 80s, in 84, I really thought I would try to grab every bit of history that I could of First English, so I could get to know, well, you, but know the people, know what went before. Okay, there was one bit of history that had me absolutely floored. From 1870 to 1880, our church was split right down the middle. That was long before they were in this building. You understand that? They were the building up on the hill on Cravath Street. They were split to the extent that they could not or did not attend church at the same time. As a matter of fact, half of them, or not, a portion of them, didn't come to church at all. Then, after 5 years, they could come to the same church building, but at different times. Guess what the issue was over? Does anyone know? Slavery. Again, 1870 to 1880. 5 to 10 years after the Civil War was over. And so I or other people would want to say, wait a minute. I know you're Norwegian and you might be a little whatever, but this seems just beyond belief that you could have such a split. And remember, when there's a church split, that means that you don't talk to her and you don't talk to her and you don't talk to him, and that's the way it goes. I mean, this is really serious stuff. And these were our church forefathers. I just wanted to show you, a lot of my information comes from, and some of you have this book. Pastor Zelli did this in 1975 about all the pastors, when they came, where they lived, what they did, but not a word about the split. You could just fill in the blanks. Why? People were a little bit, I'll use the word ashamed. Ashamed. Well, how could that be that these good Norwegian Lutherans could be so upset with each other that they couldn't even worship together? And I never had any idea what this was about until a Sunday afternoon in 2018. I was reading the Janesville Gazette, and it was like I got hit in the face. It was about Orfordville Lutheran Church, which was celebrating their 150th anniversary. And it said that all of the members of Orfordville Lutheran Church had been members of Luther Valley Lutheran Church. I don't know if you know where Luther Valley is. It's 10 miles south of Orfordville. It's rural Beloit. But they split over slavery. I thought, holy cow, I'm going to find out what this is all about. And it wasn't all clear in this article in the Janesville Gazette, but it was a little bit that the people at Luther Valley believed that slavery was a sin. The people at Orfordville said, we can't say that because there's slavery in the Bible. All right. This is huge. That means that of our people, First English, the majority felt that slavery was a sin. The minority said, we can't say that. Why did the majority feel that slavery is a sin? Well, they went to war over it. Glory, glory, hallelujah. You know, they believed that they were doing God's work in the war. And by the way, one time when I was pastor out at Hart Prairie, it was either 4th of July or Memorial Day, there were 4 GAR markers on graves. So as far as we know, there were at least 4 people, and one of them, 4 that were in the war, the Civil War, and one of them died during the war. It could have been in prison. You know, as many people died in prison in the Civil War as died in battle, so we don't know. But at any rate, this is very, very tender for a whole lot of people. Well, my good friend Larry Fremming knows all, sees all, hears all. Well, not only that, see, he taught at Orfordville for 40 years, and he was pastor at Luther Valley. So he knew both of these churches real well, and he could go in and steal their history. Half of it was all in handwriting, and he got me first. Well, I don't know which one he got first, but he got one and I read it all, and then he got me the other and I read it all. And then I also went, there was a guy in Orfordville who was their chief historian, and I went and talked to him. Okay, and don't forget, this is all way in the past. Nobody is happy about church splits. Nobody is happy. But for them it was so significant that they had to build another church. And they never did get together until around 1916, when the Norwegian Evangelical Lutheran Church of America was formed. Then finally they got together again. At least our people got together after 10 years. So that's something to keep in mind. But I started reading, and let me give you just a couple little vignettes. At Luther Valley, they all voted for president in 1860. Who ran in 1860? Oh, come on. Lincoln and Douglas. Lincoln and Douglas. Where did they vote? In the schoolhouse. Who owned the schoolhouse? The church. What did they have in the schoolhouse? They had a Lincoln desk and a Douglas desk. It was that. You could tell everybody who you were voting for. It was 30-3 in favor of Lincoln. 30-3. Never, and it was a close election. Now, all those people who voted, they're all men, of course, excuse us, but they were all men. They were all born in Norway, because Luther Valley started at the same time as Hart Prairie, 1844, same year. So you just figure they were all born in Norway. There was a comment that I think is very significant. The people at Luther Valley all owned 80 acres. Every one of them. See, that's what you had to do when you came here, is you could get 80 acres as long as you built a dwelling on it the first year. And so they all helped each other build a log cabin, and they could all get their 80 acres, and they all did. But one of those people said, it just isn't right. We all had nothing, and now we all have farms. These people who were slaves have been here 2 and 3 generations, some more, 2 or 3 generations, and they cannot own a single acre. That is not right. That was the primary motivation, as far as I'm able to figure, of why they voted heavily in favor of Lincoln. All right? Then I found out some other things. Well, Larry got me this book. I'm not going to hold it up now. But it's about the Muskego Church. The Muskego Church was the first Norwegian church. They came as early as 1838 and 1839. They kind of formed themselves in 1840. They built their church in 42. Remember, Hart Prairie, 44. Okay, they built their church in 42. They are the mother church for all the Norwegians who came here. A little bit about the Norwegians that you need to know. They were all the immigrants were lower class. You know what I mean by that? None of them went to college. Not a one. Sometimes say, oh, well, there is one, okay. But as far as we know, not a one went to college. They were all non-professional, except for the pastors. What does that tell you? The pastors were up here, the people were down there. All right? And most of the pastors, almost all of them, they came from Norway and were going back to Norway. They came as missionaries to these poor people in the United States, these Norwegians. We have to help them. We'll come over and we'll help them. There's a man called Dietrichson, and he preached at Hart Prairie, and he started probably more churches than anyone else. Very, very uppity. But there was also a man by the name of Clausen, and I have to tell you about Clausen and about Muskego and how this all fits in. Clausen. And if you go out here, you know where all the pastors are, he's the first one. He's the one who started our church. A little more about him. He was born in Denmark. He went to school in Germany. And he became a Norwegian pastor. He was the first pastor to be ordained in this country. First Norwegian. So when he came, he said, oh, I don't want to be a pastor. I'm not one of those. You know, I'm not one of those. No. I want to be a teacher. And he studied and he knew his beans. He knew it real well. But when he came to Muskego, they said, oh, we want you to be our pastor. He said, oh, no. I'm not a pastor. I'm a teacher. They said, no. You're going to be our pastor. And they forced him. They said, well, what do I have to do? You go to St. Paul's on Wisconsin Avenue in Milwaukee. Where's Don Meyer? You know who went to St. Paul's? Well, your friend. Married to the lawyer.
Eileen Harrison.
Yeah. And then also, her mother used to come here.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, you know who I mean. Yeah.
Right.
My pastor at home was from St. Paul's in Milwaukee. So, St. Paul's in Milwaukee was part of the Buffalo Synod. The Buffalo Synod was already organized, and they could ordain pastors. The Norwegians couldn't. So they told this Clausen, go to St. Paul's. He went to St. Paul's. They said, oh, you have to go to Freistadt. Now, Freistadt is right near Cedarburg, 20 miles north of Milwaukee, just a mile from where we used to live. And you go see Pastor Krause. He's the president of the Buffalo Synod. So Clausen went, I'm sure by horseback, and spent 2 or 3 days with Krause. Krause said, "You know your beans." He didn't ordain, he gave him the certificate that he could be ordained. He went back to Muskego and they ordained him. Okay? So he was ordained. But Clausen always identified with the people. So much so that there was just a great difference between Clausen and all the others. Now, where did Clausen go after Muskego? Well, he went for half a year to Koshkonong. Some of you know where East Koshkonong churches are. There's 2 churches right together. If you go there, you can read on the plaque that these churches were started by Dietrichson in 1844. Guess how many Norwegians there were in the Koshkonong area at that time? 4,300. In the 1870s and 1880s, they counted as Norwegians the families, the children of Norwegians. They were all speaking Norwegian. And as far as they knew, maybe they were all going to go back to Norway. There were 4 million Norwegians in 1880 in the United States. Guess how many Norwegians were in Norway? 4 million. So just think of that's half of the people came here, okay? And for the most part, they were all poor. When you're poor, what are your occupations? Number 1, farmer, but you didn't own the land. You could just farm the land. Number 2, they were lumbermen. Number 3, they were fishermen, okay? That was about it. When they came here, they became farmers. They owned the land. Incredible. So Clausen, after he was at Koshkonong, they heard about him at Luther Valley. They said, "We want you. Please come here, please." They begged him. And he came. He moved there. And what did he do as soon as he got there? Build a house. He had 80 acres, just like all the rest of them. Milk. They usually milk 2, 3, 4 cows, not like co-alters, but just enough. And they had probably a team of horses and maybe a team of oxen also. They had pigs and chickens and all that. They were subsistence farmers. That's what they were. And by the way, this you should know too. In the mid-1850s, Clausen took a whole bunch of people from Luther Valley and moved to St. Ansgar, Iowa. Why did they go to Iowa? Because the land was cheaper. They could double their holdings. They could sell their 80 acres and get 160 acres in Iowa. And Clausen, their pastor, was the one who helped them do that. So he stayed. And by the way, he became a chaplain all during the Civil War, okay? But because of his health started giving out, and he didn't stay through the entire war. But anyway, for quite a while. Now, but one thing I need to mention about the Muskego Church. The Synod, the Norwegian Evangelical Lutheran Synod of Wisconsin, was formed in, I gotta say this right, 1853. Guess who did not join that church? The Muskego Church, the mother church. They would not and could not join. You know why? You can even guess it right now. Because the church would not say that slavery was a sin. And those people in Muskego, in other words, all the earlier people and all the people led by Clausen believed that slavery was a sin. Isn't that interesting? They all believed that slavery was a sin. Now, did they kick the other people out of church? No, no, no. they only kicked the pastors out. So the one thing we have from, and his picture is up here, Pastor Oz. And see, the split was 1870 to 1880, the Whitewater split, and he came in 71. And all we have, and I had this before, that his daughter wrote a letter to some friends. Whether the friends were in Norway or not, I don't know. It really doesn't matter. But the daughter said, this is really so weird. They called Dad to be pastor here, and now they won't let him into the church. Now just think of, right, you think, well, it's terrible, it's awful. Well, yes, but it's also wonderful, isn't it? That they could feel that strongly about slavery. Now, they ask, of course, the pastors, why can't you say that slavery is a sin? Well, because the pastors haven't agreed on it. Well, why haven't the pastors agreed? Well, they have to see their seminary professors. Well, where was the Norwegian seminary at that time? There wasn't any. Where did the Norwegians go to seminary if they wanted to become a pastor in the 1850s? I got to back up just 1 second. We have a plaque out at Hart Prairie about Luther College, correct? Why was that so significant for those Norwegian immigrants to be sponsors of Luther College? Because not one of them had a college degree. But their kids now could have a college degree. And their kids could be doctors, lawyers, accountants, anything. Their kids could do that. And this is like going to heaven, okay? But when Luther College was formed, the seminary was not yet formed, okay? So where did the Norwegians go if they wanted to become a pastor? Concordia Seminary, St. Louis, the Missouri Synod Seminary. Now, not only is Missouri Synod conservative, but also Missouri at that time was a slave state. The Missouri Compromise from 1820 made it a slave state. So these, and there was, I have this picture here and stuff that Larry gave me. There was a Norwegian on the faculty at Concordia Seminary because the Norwegians all spoke Norwegian. And at that time yet, the Germans were speaking German. There was very little English being spoken. So this was all kind of mixed in. Well, at any rate, they asked the pastors, give us a reason why you will not say that slavery is a sin. And they said, the pastor said, it's very clear. Because St. Paul writes in several places, slaves, be obedient to your masters. At least 3 places. 1, Ephesians. 2, Colossians. 3, 1 Timothy. 3 times Paul says that. If he said it 3 times, that must be important. They didn't say they were biblical literalists. All the people in St. Louis were. What's the opposite of a biblical literalist? One who believes in historical criticism. Well, who is saying this and why, and what is the intention, and what do other people say and all that? Well, the whole point is those 3 places were 3 different letters that Paul wrote to different people at different times, okay? So he was saying the same thing one time to different people. But I thought it would be perhaps valuable. I want to read this one place and then discuss it just a bit. It's going to take me just a second here. And this is from Ephesians. Oh, I can't even see.
You need an assisting minister?
Well, look, I'm going to paraphrase. Children, obey your parents. Wives, be subject to your husband, for the husband is the head of the wife. You got all that? All right, remember that. Then, slaves, be obedient to your masters, because your master is like Christ to you. Okay? And in all three places, it's the same thing. Wives, be obedient to your husbands. Slaves, be obedient to your masters. Why did Paul say that? What did Jesus say about slavery? Anybody? Zero. Now, one thing you should know, that when Jesus gave a parable, the word for servant and the word for slave is the same thing, doulos. So it's a little bit confusing. Sometimes people say, oh, Jesus spoke about slaves here. Well, we don't know that because the word for servant is the same as the word for slavery. So in a sense, Jesus never spoke about slavery. There was one, and by the way, this is the gospel for Reformation Sunday. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And they said, what do you mean free? We are children of Abraham. We've never been slaves to anyone, correct? All right. The Jews never were slaves, never could have slaves. Why? Because they were all slaves at one time. But God rescued them at the time of Moses and the Exodus, okay? And from that time on, you shall never have slaves again. So it was very clear that the Jews shouldn't have slaves. So why Paul? Paul was the missionary to the Gentiles, the Romans. And Romans had slaves. Not only that, the Romans were very proud of the fact that they had slaves. But one thing you must know about slavery in the Roman times, most of the low-class slaves, they had to go in the boat and row the boat and all that stuff. The upper-class slaves, meaning those, whenever the Romans would win a battle, there was officers that enlisted men. The officers, they would grab them first, and the officers were upper class. And those became upper class slaves. Many of them became teachers for the Roman children. And almost all, I can't say almost all because I don't know, but many of them had a determinate sentence, meaning you are going to be a slave for 10 years. If you follow all your rules and what you're supposed to do, and by the way, they could identify the slaves, either a clip on the ear or the nose or something. They knew who was a slave, okay? But if you do what you're supposed to do for 10 years, you're free. And every town had what's called the Freedmen's Society, the people who had been slaves. And the Romans were very proud of that because they really that way assimilated these people into their society. So the Romans were proud. Yes, we have slavery, but we treat them well, and our whole point is that they can be free and live a free life, I guess, and become citizens. Paul was a citizen of Rome. I can't really say for sure that the freed slaves could be, I just don't know that. if they could be citizens, but I think they can, but you don't know, Joseph, do you?
Yeah, so so this is one of those fun things in our society that we overlook as Americans. Only about 5 to 10% of the world's population lives in birthright citizenship countries like the United States. So if you're born here, you're a citizen. That's not true for like 90% of the world even today. And it wasn't true in Rome. You had to earn your citizenship in ancient Rome, often through military service.
Yeah.
And I believe, I'd have to double check this, if you were a freed man, you could then serve in the military and become a citizen.
Okay, thank you. So you could become a citizen anyway. But the Romans are very proud of that. And I think perhaps they had a right to be, when you think about a lot of people, when they fought, they beat the enemy, would just kill them all. Romans wouldn't do that. That's stupid. All right, so that's part of this whole slavery thing. So Muskego, in 1853, when the Norwegian church was formed, said, we cannot be members of the church unless you say that slavery is a sin. Did the church ever say that slavery is a sin? To the best of my knowledge, no, they did not. Why? Well, in a sense, because they didn't have to. The war was over. I don't know how many people from Luther Valley fought in the war. Like I say, we have 4 in our. Somebody just stuck. I don't know who did this. In the cemetery out there at Hart Prairie, there were 4 GAR markers on. It was either 4th of July, but it was somebody who knew more than I, and they were all men who could have served. Okay, but at Luther Valley there were probably 10 times that. There could have been 40 or 50. All right. So the issue is authoritarianism versus, what's the opposite? Communitarianism. Communitarianism is God is in the midst of people. Authoritarian is God is outside, and I or someone else smart like me will tell you what God wants you to do. Luther was very much a communitarian. I want to give you one little example about Luther. You know, he ate with the students and they wrote down his stuff. So one time in one of his table talks, they said, Luther, what are we going to do? How can our church go on? He said, what do you mean? And the person, it's probably one of the students, said, well, we don't have any bishops. How can you have a church without bishops? And Luther said, bishops? Well, you can live with them or live without them. Why not? Well, the guy said, well, wait a minute. If we don't have bishops, how are we going to get pastors? Luther said that's very plain and very simple. You just go to the church and have them vote on the person from their membership that they would like as their pastor. Well, what about their education? Well, we'll take care of it. It'll work. I have to tell you another thing that happened a little bit last Sunday. We were at, this is Hope Lutheran Church, their 50th anniversary last Sunday in Milton. And guess who was there? Jenny Monk Watson. Because she works there now, and her parents were there too. Her son left Sunday. He was there for church. Then he left to fly to Germany. He's going to be in Germany for this whole semester. Went to Lübeck. He had a training session about Lübeck. And they told him, oh, you must know, that's where the Hanseatic League was formed. Who knows what the Hanseatic League is? Oh, don't raise your hand. All right. At the Council of Trent, which was right after Luther died. One of the complaints that the Germans had to the Pope, we got all these Lutherans, and guess what they eat on Fridays? They can eat a wiener, they can eat a bratwurst, they can have roast beef, they can have anything. Isn't there something we can do? The Pope's thinking. Hey, maybe. You know, he said, I think that fish meat is not really meat. I'm serious, that's what he said. Fish meat is not really meat. So I think you can have fish on Fridays. Oh, the Germans were so pleased. But then they were very sad. Why were they sad? Come on, now you got it. Come on. Why? If they were happy that they could eat fish, why were they sad? Because they had no fish. They had no fish. Who had fish? Norwegians. Yes, Norwegians. Guess what the Norwegians didn't have? Grain. Wheat. They didn't have corn. Wheat, barley, rye, oats. Guess who had that? Germans. So they developed the Hanseatic League. So they traded. And by the way, oftentimes they use the same barrels that were used for fish. They clean them out a little bit, use them for grain on the other end. When Nancy and I were over in Bergen, we walked around, and there was a church. Oh, Lutheran church. Oh, let's go look at, we can walk through the Lutheran church. When we went, there was windows. There was a lot of language, and there was plaques and all that. What language was it in? You're wrong. All in German. Why German? Young people in Germany, instead of enlisting in the military, they enlisted in the Hanseatic League for 2, 3, and 4 years. And so in all these buildings along Bergen, and you can go in the buildings and see where they slept. It was cold there. And they slept, well, anyway, they would wrap themselves in blankets, and they all went to church there. So chances are, this Clausen guy might have served Germany in Norway, and he became very, very, well, he loved the Norwegians. And particularly, he loved the fact that these were all lower class, and all the pastors were upper class. I wonder if we could do something about that. That's why he came over here. Isn't that beautiful? I think it's one of Clausen, and he's the one who started our church. He started the Muskego Church, he started our church, and he served at Luther Valley. Those were the 3 churches that left on the slavery issue that said, no, we cannot worship unless we say that slavery is a sin. Now, there's something kind of beautiful about that. I think it's awfully beautiful. That's the kind of people that we had before. All right, then, well, you might have questions. I'm going to shut up real soon. So they bought this church in 1907, I believe. 1908, okay. 1908, and that's when, right around that time, maybe the next year, they stuck in the word English. Okay, and until that time, they started using English over up on the hill a little bit before they came here. I'm German, you know. When did the Germans start using English in their churches? You all know the answer. Just think. Huh? First World War. My mother was in school. She was born in 1910. She says she remembers, she's gone. She remembered 1917 She was in school when somebody from the county came, threw out all the books, all the German books. They all had to be English from there on. Okay? But the Norwegians, our bunch, see, Americanization had a lot to do with this. A lot to do with this. If you're going to be American, all these three places, Muskego, First Lutheran, Whitewater, and Luther Valley, they all were way in advance of others in their Americanization. We are Americans. Yeah, we speak. There's another thing that I didn't really mention. Pastor Oss, the one they wouldn't let in church, was pastor of how many churches? 4. Scuppernong, that's Palmyra, Hard Prairie, and Sugar Creek, right. So he was still pastor there, but he was living in Whitewater because that's where they had the parsonage. Okay? So it was just an odd thing that here he's living here and called here, but couldn't get in the church, at least for the first 5 years. It looks like he was here for another year when at least he could get in the church, and at least they were coming together. So what brought them together? Well, time brought them together. I asked Larry that. I said, Larry, I'm going to talk to these people. They're going to want to know what brought the people together. Time, but also for those who said slavery was a sin, they could keep on believing that. They could keep on believing that. What they could not do is say, we will never get together with people who think that slavery, according to the Bible, that Christians could have slaves. So I guess they got thinking, well, okay, maybe so. And again, what I want to mention for sure here is that after 10 years, our people all got together. Thank goodness they didn't build a new church. Larry gave me something just yesterday, that our people had agreed to split. I think, and all we have is who the trustees were, Helgeson, Benson, and Norson, and all that, of this group and that group, and for $200 they were going to split, okay? Well, apparently that did not go through. They did not split. At Luther Valley and Orfordville, they obviously did split, okay? You know, but they had to live with that. So what I always wondered about at Luther Valley, I preached there one time, and I gave them this sermon. And that's when they were all in their cars, and they all honked afterward. So, okay. Because they had never heard a real discussion about it. So it was fun just doing that. But at any rate, they still had their cemetery. And the cemetery was owned by the Cemetery Association, not just by the church. So they could get together for funerals. And I don't know, I guess they could have a bratwurst. No, Norwegians didn't eat bratwurst. Whatever, they could have a lefse or something in the cemetery. But then they had to go their separate ways. And always just, and by the way, the same thing here. See, the people in Whitewater, I'm sure that for a long time, they used the Hart Prairie Cemetery. Because that was Norwegian, you know. And we had, we had funerals there until recently. Do you have any questions? I know I jumped around a little bit, but you almost have to, because it doesn't just follow in order. But do you have any questions? Yes.
I know you talk about the hill. There was a church on a hill somewhere.
I'm sorry.
You talked about the hill. There was a church on a hill here somewhere in Whitewater?
Yes, Cravath Street, right where the water tower is on the east side. Yes. And there's a pot there now on a shade. And the other building was a hospital, and that was Arnold's, was their name. But the church was there in the hospital, and then later on they built the water tower on the east side. But, and let me tell you this too, about these people that moved into town. They were the more advanced in Americanization. Why? Well, because they worked in town. What drew them in town? Most of them worked at Esterly's reaper work. Esterly employed over 400 in the 1870s and 80s, over 400. So they worked here at the reaper plant, and apparently somebody could tell them what to do, how to run this machine. There must have been a few people who could speak English and Norwegian, okay? But anyway, they did not have to speak Norwegian. But they did not have to speak English. But their kids all had to learn English in school. So their kids all spoke English to each other, but when they got home, they spoke Norwegian. Isn't that interesting? So that's the way it was. And I asked somebody just yesterday about Spanish. Who were we?
Joseph.
Huh?
Joseph.
Yeah. Joseph.
Kimball.
Oh, you know him. Kimball. Oh, okay, he's your friend, Jack. Joseph Kimball. Okay, he knew about all these people that have come from not Mexico. They came through Mexico, but they came from Central America. I said, well, do they speak English? He said, well, and by the way, he said that the schools are having no trouble getting more ESL teachers. It's possible that the police department is having trouble getting, that was such an issue here. And Senator Ron Johnson spoke and all that about this terrible thing. Well, I don't know if it's so terrible. And Joseph said, well, they're all doing very, very well in school. Maybe, Jack, you want to speak to that? I don't know. But he said they're doing very well. Well, I said, what language do they speak at home? He said, they all speak Spanish at home, but they get to school and they speak English. But when they get married, they'll probably speak English. Probably. Don't know. What do you think, Lowell?
Well, I think the majority of them that come here don't speak English.
They do speak English.
They do not speak English.
They do not speak. No.
Because it's a terrible problem in the school system.
Yes.
There's so many of them that don't speak
Yes.
English, and all the teachers speak English, so it's naturally a problem.
I'm not saying it's not a problem.
Okay,
It's a problem. But the point is that we're dealing with it
well,
the right way and the best way. At least I got that information just yesterday. Yes.
Well, we came over from Denmark and we all spoke beautiful English, except my middle brother, he was third grade. And they put him in the back of the classroom, this teacher. My dad was professor, so they knew, all that stuff, or their case of oratory. But they put him in the back of the classroom, and in 3 months he spoke perfect American English without an accent. So people meet him, and why doesn't your brother have an accent? You have an accent, and I came with a British accent. But he learned it from scratch, and that is what will happen.
Pastor,
I happen to know some people.
my grandfather came from Norway to Albany
Yeah.
in 1875. 1876. And he passed away in 1960, and he still didn't speak English at that time. When he spoke to my father at the table, it was in Norwegian.
Okay.
And I'm not making excuses or promises, but older people tend to speak their native language, and I don't have a problem with that. I understand that. The young children grow up in an English-speaking society. Of course they grow up.
And your dad probably can speak both,
My dad could speak both.
but you can't.
I can't.
No. But that's the way it goes, I think.
In case you're wondering, the Packers start in half an hour.
I didn't start for a quarter of. I'm done. Yeah. But, yeah. Oh. Thank you. This was fun. Thank
When
you.
is chapter
Bye-bye.
2?
Huh?
When is chapter 2?
No. But thank you very much.
So I want to lift up a couple things before people run off. I know you want to get to the game. The church we're getting reprinted the history book written by Pastor Larry Fremming. Those are for sale. I think they're $5 or $10 if you wanted to read more. We also have, back in the 70s, a seminary student came here and did 12 essays as one of his seminary assignments on the history of churches in this area, and we have a stack of copies of those 12 historical essays that focus more on this church, whereas Pastor Larry's focuses more on Hart Prairie. If you want one of those, you can just come by the office and ask for it. Right now, I'm having Tammy in her free time retype them. We've spoken to the student who wrote those. He's now the director of a children's museum down in Indianapolis. He's still alive and working today. And he gave us permission to go ahead and reprint all of those. So if you want to know more, we have those. Well, we have the essays are ready now, but in the near future, we'll have Pastor Larry Fremming's book reprinted. And you can pick up either of those. And then I wanted to clarify, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the issue on slavery that divided the church back then wasn't about whether or not slavery was okay. Both sides said slavery was morally and ethically wrong. It was just a fight over whether we call it a sin or don't call it a sin, right?
That's correct.
And it's funny when you look back through the history of the church and the things that divided the church. A lot of times you get 100 years in the future, and we sit there and go, "Why would you divide over that?" I think today we would look back at that issue and say, if nobody's going to own slaves, why would you divide over whether you're going to call it a sin or not call it a sin? That's kind of my reaction. Like, nobody's having slaves. That's good enough. Let's move on, right? So fascinating piece of history of our church. And thank you, Pastor Jerry, for doing that, for providing us with this.
And that's what they did, essentially, just what you said.
Yeah.
They just moved on. But it took them a while.
Yeah.
It took them a while. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh.